Welcome everyone to our final session of day 2 of our online annual conference with the theme Learning from the Response to COVID. Throughout this pandemic, the Welsh Government have made it really clear that housing and support needed to be provided for everyone to keep them safe from COVID. And importantly, that included people with no recourse to public funds. We know that in the past, people with no recourse to public funds have really struggled to have access to housing and support when they've needed it. And we know that people are often facing significant trauma and challenges from their prior experiences. We've had a real opportunity over the last year to make sure that we can reach out and support those people, make sure that people with no recourse to public funds have had access to the housing and support that they need. But what happens when the pandemic is over? What happens when we revert back to the situation where people don't have automatic access to housing and support? We think it's really important to be talking about this issue today at our conference with an audience that's full of people from local authorities, from housing associations and support providers, because it's clear that collectively we all need to play our part in making sure that people don't go back to the situation they were in before, where they didn't have access to housing and support. We've got a fantastic panel today full of huge expertise and experience who will be talking about this really important subject. We'll be welcoming Emmy Todd from the Welsh Refugee Council, Wanjiku and Mbugua from BAWSO, Tamsin Stirling, who's an independent housing consultant who's done research in this area, and Alicja Zalesinska from Pawb. First up, we're going to hear from Emmy Todd, who's representing the Welsh Refugee Council, to talk about some of their experience of working with people with no recourse to public funds, some of the challenges and some of the opportunities for the future. Welcome, Emmy.
Hi everyone, thanks Katie, really happy to be here on behalf of Welsh Refugee Council. I just wanted to start with talking a little bit about what the no recourse to public funds condition means to the people that we work with. So it's a condition that can be applied to somebody's leave in the UK due to them being subject to immigration control, and it effectively means that they can't access what are considered to be public funds. Which is a collection of specific welfare benefits listed in the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999. And that includes universal credit, personal independence payments, disability living allowance, income support, child benefit, housing benefit, access to statutory homelessness services, and a number of others. And this can cause a lot of difficulties to a lot of the people we work with. In terms of who has the condition of NRPF, it can include people who are on student visas, work visas, overstayers, those who have entered the UK without permission, families or individuals granted limited leave to remain on Article 8 rights, and those seeking asylum and who have been refused asylum. However, no recourse to public funds doesn't include social services support and Home Office support when you're eligible for it. So in terms of the people we work with at Welsh Refugee Council, we work predominantly with those seeking asylum and refugees. Refugees don't have the NRPF condition, they can access public funds, but those seeking asylum and those who've been refused asylum do not have the same access. And that group of people also most often or not don't have the right to work, which means that if they're not eligible for asylum support, which can happen at any time throughout the asylum process for several reasons, they can fall into destitution, meaning that they don't have any access to statutory homelessness services or financial support. And so some of the challenges we see there are when Home Office support is stopped or discontinued or refused at any point during that process, or somebody's asylum claim is refused and then they don't have an outstanding immigration application. And we see several other challenges as well with things like access to bus passes for our clients. While they are eligible, the evidence that's required often includes evidence of receiving certain welfare benefits, which obviously they can't due to having an RPF condition. And there are also challenges with accessing EMA, educational maintenance allowance, free school meals and pupil development grants. And we also see quite a lot of misconceptions around NRPF where we approach caseworkers might approach social services or housing departments, and clients are turned away because they say that they have no recourse to public funds, but actually someone might still be able to access that support. There are also challenges around legal aid or immigration advice in Wales, and there being legal aid deserts, and that meaning that people can't always access immigration advice to try and regularise their immigration status in the UK. And what we often see is that there is a disproportionate effect on certain groups of people who have NRPF. Women, pregnant women, single mothers, single parents with young children, those with disabilities, and the elderly, who may have additional difficulties when it comes to not being able to access public funds. So in terms of what we do at the Welsh Refugee Council, we're lucky to be part of the Asylum Rights Programme, which is a Welsh Government funded project. We work with, there are 7 organisations that work together in Wales to assist those seeking asylum to access and know their rights. And so, as I said earlier, throughout the asylum process, it may be that somebody's access to support, which is provided through the Home Office, is refused or discontinued. And that can be due to a mistake, an administration error. It can be due to several things, which leaves the individual destitute and not able to access any publicly funded support. And so a lot of that work that we do is around working with our partners to provide destitution support, like the Red Cross, local organisations in Wales, but also, where possible, challenging those decisions. So when those mistakes are made or errors, that we work with clients to prepare and submit appeals to the Asylum Support Tribunal. And over the birth of the Asylum Rights Programme, that's been seen to be very successful, particularly where there are imminent evictions and an unlawful decision has been made and can therefore be challenged. And part of that is also through working with Dalton Pierce Glynn, which are a solicitors firm, around their PAT project, which is a pre-action protocol project to use pre-action protocol letters with a view to judicial reviews to challenge unlawful decisions made by public bodies like the Home Office or social services, where there has been a decision made that can be challenged, working to support clients to access their rights to challenge that. And another big part of our work is liaising with solicitors. So when clients don't have an outstanding immigration application or it's been refused, to make sure that they're able to access advice, to try and regularise that and get back into support and get out of destitution. The Welsh Refugee Council also works closely with the Welsh Refugee Coalition, which is a coalition of over 50 organisations in Wales, to raise issues with decision makers. So, for example, in the last year, we've written to ministers and members of the Senedd about the difficulties with educational maintenance allowance, with transport and bus passes, to raise the issues that our clients are facing through having a NRPF condition on their leave. And we also work to support other campaigns nationally, for example, Asylum Matters, the Unity Project, NACOM, who are working to try and get rid of the NRPF condition altogether. And so in terms of what needs to be done now and in the future, I think, like Katie mentioned, we're very grateful of a lot of what the Welsh Government has done over this period in Wales. Their continued commitment to the Nation of Sanctuary Plan, which I think Tamsin is going to talk about a little later. The support for the Asylum Rights Project and Asylum Justice, who have also been funded to do a lot of this work where there isn't legal aid available. And also the continued Everyone In policy. It has certainly been enormously welcomed for our clients who would ordinarily be street homeless or sofa surfing during this pandemic and have been able to access support. However, there are a lot of things that we would want to see in the future. I think the existing campaigns around getting rid of the NRPF condition, pushing to allow people to access mainstream benefits based on need but not immigration status, and trying to encourage local authorities to advocate for that as well, to the UK government to make that change. We've also seen through our caseworkers that knowledge around NRPF and training for frontline workers and gatekeepers is really important. Again, Welsh Government have started this at the end of last year, but we welcome that and trying to make sure that there's better understanding of what NRPF means and what it means for our clients in particular, those seeking asylum and migrants with NRPF conditions. And the other thing is around ensuring that there's accessible information for individuals to know their rights. For example, migrants with NRPF conditions on their leave don't always know that there is a possibility to apply to change that through a change of conditions application to when you're in destitution, that you can try and apply to remove that condition from your leave. And again, that's something that working with people like Asylum Justice and other organisations is really important in Wales, to ensure that people know that there is a possibility that they can remove that, but also that they can access support and advice to do that successfully. I think there's a bigger issue here around challenging decisions. So making sure to work with people like Dalton or other firms to look at systemic change, challenging unlawful decisions where they are made, so that we can try and change things for those who have NRPF. And as a whole, we don't want to see a return to what the situation was a year ago. We don't want to see a return to people on the streets and sofa surfing where they're not able to access support that they need, and they are living in unsuitable accommodation and destitution, and working to make sure that those people aren't forgotten. I think in the last year, the NRPF has become better known to people, particularly compared to last May when the Prime Minister was quoted as not knowing that people had a condition imposed on their leave that meant they couldn't access benefits. But I do think there's a lot more to be done. And in terms of our client group, those seeking asylum who have often experienced enormous trauma in their home countries, but also in their journey to the UK, and then also throughout the asylum process in the UK, which can be a long journey, it is vital that we work together to try and primarily to get rid of the no recourse to public funds condition, but also to ensure that those people don't fall through a gap and remain in destitution. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Emmy. It's great to hear about the work that you do, and hopefully a number of people in the audience will feel that better informed about some of the issues and able to contact you if there are any issues that arise with refugees and asylum seekers in the future. I'm really pleased to introduce next Wanjiku from BAWSO. BAWSO do some really incredibly important work across Wales with survivors of violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence. And they play a particularly important role in supporting many women who have no recourse to public funds. I know Wanjiku is going to reflect on some of the challenges that those women face, and hopefully this will be really informative to lots of people in the audience and give you an insight into some of those challenges, but also what you can do to support women and organisations like BAWSO going forward. So I'll hand over to Wanjiku. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I've got a presentation. If you could turn to the next page, please. And I'll just quickly introduce BAWSO. For those who may not know BAWSO, it was established in 1995. It's a Wales organisation. And the main aim was to support women and children from Black and minority ethnic communities who are fleeing VALDA, SV, and other forms of violence. And by that, we mean such abuses as forced marriage, honor-based violence, female genital mutilation, and modern-day slavery. We're supported by the Welsh government and other local authorities in various counties of Wales. We are no Wales organisation. If you could move to the next page. Just before we go into the issue of no recourse to public funds, I just wanted to describe the women that we support, just give you a picture of the background of the women that we support. A lot of them being in the same category as Emma has described, because some of the women that we support are asylum seekers and refugees. So really, we work with women that have come into the UK from other parts of the world. some of them being refugees and asylum seekers. But what are the issues that the BME woman carries with her that make her even more vulnerable? The first one is socioeconomic constraints, where a lot of the women coming into the country have no, they're not financially independent. They're dependent on their husbands or their partners' finances. And so they become very vulnerable when domestic abuse takes place. There's social isolation for them because, again, as I've explained, a lot of them have come over from other parts of the world, some from non-EU countries, others from EU countries, because a big percentage of the women that we support are from Eastern European countries. They have the same barriers as the women from non-EU countries, and especially in regards to language barriers and that socioeconomic constraints. They have to deal with diversity in terms of religious and cultural diversity, where sometimes those two aspects make their life a bit difficult because they're hindered by certain things that to do with their religion and to do with their culture. And while we do not challenge religion, we can challenge some of the cultural aspects that they bring with them. A lot of the women that we support have insecure immigration status, or some of them may be on spousal visa, have joined their spouses or partners here in the UK. Others may have no recourse to public funds because they've come into the country, as Emma explained, sometimes as students, sometimes as workers. And with the current immigration system, it's such that anybody who comes from a non-EU country to join a partner or even to work in this country, the first 5 to 10 years means that they're not eligible for any benefits. Be they doctors, be they care workers, they're not eligible to any benefit. So they have that no recourse to public funds stamp on their passport. And if they're not supported by the person that has brought them into the country, or if they're not supported by, if they're not able to work anymore, if they're not to study as their visa says, they cannot receive any benefits from the government. So that's the category, that's the background to the women that we support in BAWSO. You could go to the next slide, please. This just gives you a number of the referrals that we've received in BAWSO in the last 3-4 years. And you can see on the blue category, those are the inquiries that we've received. These are referrals for women looking for refuge space. These are referrals for women that have experienced domestic abuse and are looking to go into refuge. So this group does not include, for example, an Eastern European woman who's fleeing domestic abuse and she's got 5-6 children, doesn't want to go into refuge, just wants to be accommodated in a different place away from the husband because she's working, but she cannot afford to leave work and be a mother to her children. So these figures are only for women that were looking for refuge spaces at the time. And you can see that the numbers for the inquiries are higher than the ones that we are actually able to support. And when we say supported, it doesn't mean that BAWSO specifically supported them. We were able to refer them to other agencies, either within Wales or in other parts of the UK, for them to receive support through refugees. If you could go to the next slide, please. So what are the reasons for no recourse to public funds? Why do women find themselves in this situation? So this is a condition on their leave to remain. Some of them, as Emma said, are asylum seekers who have exhausted right of appeal. Some of them are refugees, again, refugees, families mostly. Some of them are people that have been trafficked into the UK. Some of them are parents of British children. They themselves have no British citizenship, but their children do. Some of them are migrants that are born of UK citizens abroad, and some of them are undocumented or irregular migrants. If you could go to the next page, please. So how does no recourse to public funds affect women with who are going through domestic violence? So in cases involving domestic violence, the issue is the effect that domestic violence has had and continues to have on the children and the individual person who is seeking this support and their children. So already there's that issue of domestic violence. Even before we talk about no recourse to public funds, the person that we're supporting has gone through domestic violence, and that normally should be the primary issue, the fact that they're going through domestic violence. But in cases where there's no recourse to public funds, we find ourselves dealing more with the issue of no recourse to public funds. Our clients need to demonstrate a need for care and attention, arising not only from a lack of accommodation and funds, but also for the prevention of harm or violence or some other circumstance. If I can give an example, if somebody with recourse to public funds, if say for example, it's a local British woman, she's got recourse to public funds, when she goes through domestic violence, the only thing that you as a support provider would have to think about is the appropriate housing that you can get for her. You don't have to start fighting with agencies to see who's going to give her money to get accommodation. This is a situation with women with no recourse to public funds. The issue of no recourse to public funds becomes primary in front of the domestic violence issue. So another thing I wanted to say about this is that because of marriage breakdowns, a lot of the women that we support find themselves in situations where they're about to become destitute. They find themselves in situations where they're about to become homeless because domestic abuse has taken place and they have no one to fall back on. If you could go to the next slide, please. So what we found with the victims that we support is that a lot of them find it difficult to live very violent relationships because they have nowhere else to go. Because the woman who, in the first instance, say go to the housing options or homelessness department and say, oh, I'm going through domestic abuse, could somebody help me? Or just ring any helpline. And the first question they'll be asked, what's your immigration status? And this will put them off, and this will make it so difficult for them to seek help. Sometimes they receive the wrong advice. Sometimes people are not sure of what support is available, and they'll be put off. And we've come across a lot of ladies who've continued living in very violent relationships just because they did not know where to go. As I said earlier, a lot of BME women victims are generally socially isolated. Sometimes because of language and cultural barriers, they do not mix very well with people to know what's available, to know where to ask for help. So they find themselves very vulnerable. We know that local authorities have a duty to provide service where a need can be properly established, but this does not happen always. And sometimes it's a matter of an officer not knowing what's available or what the woman is entitled to. If you could go to the next slide. So on average, we told that there were 1,000 applications made under domestic violence rule. The domestic violence rule, it's on the second point there, Destitution, Domestic Violence Concession Rule. This is a rule that allows, and we're very grateful to the UK government for this, where if a woman has no recourse to public funds and she finds herself a victim of abuse, violence, any form of abuse, she can then apply to the Home Office for her case to be fast-tracked so that she receives her indefinite leave to remain and is able to, and in the first instance, she's given benefits for 3 months so that she can move on and apply for indefinite leave to remain. This specific rule has helped a lot of the women that we support, but unfortunately, not every woman who has no recourse to public funds falls under this category. This is only for people on spousal visas. It's not for people who've come in as a student and got married after that. It's not for women who are on a family leave to remain. it's only for women who are on a spousal visa. And with a spousal visa, it means that they must have been married, legally married to their partner, who has to be a British citizen or somebody settled in the UK. It cannot be used for example, if there was a couple working at the hospital, the husband is a consultant and and he's not received his citizenship, and domestic abuse takes place, his wife is not counted as a person with a spousal visa. That's a completely different situation. So we would have to find other routes to support that woman. And for this case, again, women need to evidence, and the DV, they have, for the Home Office to give you this leave, you have to show that you've suffered domestic abuse for some time. Sometimes, as we know, many victims fail to report domestic violence. A lot of them are scared to report domestic violence. So by the time we trying to support them to apply for this concession, they haven't got the information that they require. If you could go to the next one, please. So many women in the process become overstayers because once they come into the country, they have to renew their spousal visa after 2 years or 5 years. A lot of them get into a situation where the spouse refuses to apply for this, make this application to the Home Office. And being their sponsor, if a woman is on a spousal visa, her sponsor has to apply for this leave. So if they don't do that, the woman becomes an overstayer. And being an overstayer means that if domestic abuse takes place, they'll have nowhere to go. A significant number of women rely on charitable support and goodwill of individuals, sometimes complete strangers by the time we support them. Some women are forced to return to their home countries of origin, or some, especially when they're asylum seekers, may face further persecution because they're divorced or separated. If we could move to the next slide, please. So this is the impact of no recourse to public funds rule on the women that we support. You can see that obviously there'll be the financial effect. There is further abuse, there is emotional abuse, housing, as I said, some of them will find themselves homeless. There's an effect on children, really, really great effect on the children. And then these women become more vulnerable. They're the same women that will be trafficked and or exploited in other ways, just so that they can find a roof over their head. So those are some of the impacts of no recourse to public funds rule. If we could move to the next slide. So why have we found ourselves here? Why do we not have any support for these women? Why do they find themselves in difficulties where there should be support for everyone? And you know that with the currently, since COVID began in March 2020, we've been very lucky in that the Welsh government has allowed for £10 million to be used on anyone requiring accommodation, including women with no recourse to public funds. This has not always been there, and it's brought about a lot of problems. So why have we found ourselves in this situation? Sometimes it's the increased demand for services. As the days go by, and you know, very recently with people from Eastern European countries, I think in the last 10, 15 years, they've changed, things have changed for them a lot, in that they also have been deemed to be of no recourse to public funds, even though they're not from non-EU countries. They found themselves in that place. And this has, in return, made it difficult for local authorities to meet up with all the needs that are in every county. There is no central funding for no recourse to public funds, so there's a reliance on local authorities. There's also the complex overlapping of immigration rules, and this causes a lot of confusion in assessment and support. Immigration rules change very, very quickly and suddenly, and before you learn of one immigration rule, a new one comes and changes everything, and especially to do with immigration issues. Then lack of statutory regulation. there is no clarity on individual agencies' role. One of the issues that we've come across working in the whole of Wales is that every county responds very differently to requests for support for women with no recourse to public funds. So there's that confusion that you don't know, Flintshire might do this while Cardiff does something different. And this really makes it difficult for women to receive the support that they need. If you could move to the next slide. So what are the local authority obligations to people with no recourse to public funds? As I said, it differs from one county to the other, and it depends on how much experience local authorities have. But some of the things that we are asking is that there's a good practice. And like I said, with women who are going through domestic abuse, that you look at the issue of domestic abuse before you start thinking about everything else. But unfortunately, and I know it's about finances, it's about money, but if people are to look at that issue, domestic abuse, how do you deal with a woman going through domestic abuse before you start thinking about her immigration status? And then you provide that advice and assistance, find a solution for the individual, not as a person with no recourse to public funds, but for the person who's come for help as an individual, and then have support that is humane and customer focused. If that's the obligations of local authority to women with no recourse to public funds, it would help, who are going through domestic abuse, it would help a lot if that model was to be used and followed. If you could move to the next slide, please. So BAWSO support for women with no recourse to public funds. I put here just some of the sections that we use when we're pushing for support for women or families with no recourse to public funds. One of which is section 17 of the Children's Act that really says that every child matters and every child deserves support, regardless of whether the parents have recourse or not, regardless of where they've come from, they are entitled to support. But sometimes this is twisted, and what we get from some local authorities, as I said, some social services will say, oh, if the child is entitled to support, we take the child and place them into care, into foster care. And again, this really beats logic, because it's more expensive to support that child in care. You're not even thinking about the emotional damage and that separation of that child from the parent who cause. But the fact that they are willing to place a child in care when the mother hasn't done anything wrong other than having no recourse to public funds really beats logic. But it's something that has happened where we've pushed for a woman to be supported by social services. We've been told, oh, we take the child into care, we have no duty to the mother. And that's something that has happened. But we use that section 17, which gives a child's rights to family life, and then the expectant and nursing mother's rights, and also the human rights assessment. If we go to the next page, please. So for BAWSO, what to do, apart from challenging and advocating on behalf of women that are going through domestic abuse and who have no recourse to public funds, apart from raising awareness on the issue, because we do raise awareness with local authorities, with different organizations, both all through Wales, we do raise awareness on issues of no recourse to public funds. We raise charitable funds, we raise money ourselves, and we keep some money that we use to help any women that come to us, say for food or clothes or transport from one place to the other. We raise awareness with professionals. We raise awareness with communities affected, just to tell them what they're entitled to, how they can get help. We challenge decisions affecting families with no recourse to public funds. We lobby and campaign. I talked about the DDVC concession that came in place in 2012, and we joined in with Southall Black Sisters and other organizations to have that put in place to support women on spousal visas. And we currently are lobbying and campaigning for women in other categories other than just women on spousal visas. We're campaigning for other women who are going through domestic abuse with no recourse to public funds to be added onto that category for DDVC. We also signpost women to agencies that may support them where best possible, and especially when we're working with women from Eastern European countries. The difference between women from Eastern European countries with no recourse to public funds or who are not entitled to benefits and the women from non-EU countries is that the women from EU countries are entitled to work. So sometimes if we support that woman to get childcare or support with childcare, should be able to work and be able to get accommodation. So we able to signpost women that way to other agencies that may support them. And the next slide, please, is my contact numbers, because I've said all I needed to say. If you'd like any more information on the work that BAWSO does, please do not hesitate to contact me on either of those contact details there. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Wanjiku. That was hugely informative. And I think, you know, if we think about all the things that impact on domestic abuse, like power and control, we see those exacerbated by the issue of no recourse to public funds, particularly with that example that you were giving about needing the spouse to apply for that spousal visa and them having huge control, therefore, on the impact on their wife or partner. And the burden of proof, having to demonstrate that you've experienced that domestic abuse when you've probably been too scared or too frightened to seek help beforehand, and the additional barriers of language and culture as well. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective, really, really important. I'm delighted that next up we're going to hear from Tamsin Stirling, who recently undertook some research and produced a report for the Welsh Government on accommodation for refused asylum seekers, a feasibility study that looked at some of those options. So thinking to the future and post-pandemic, I'm sure we'll want to reflect on some of those. So I'd like to welcome Tamsin to share her reflections on that.
Thank you very much, Katie. I'm delighted to be here. And I think what the previous two presentations have shown is the complexity of legal and finance, you know, how that interfaces with financial issues in terms of folk who have no recourse to public funds, and the absolutely essential role that organisations like the Welsh Refugee Council and BAWSO play in supporting those folk. Could you put my slides up, Gwyn? Thank you very much. So I'm going to skip through fairly quickly. Want to give a big shout out first to Heather Petch, who actually led the research. Heather's done a lot of work on accommodation options for refused asylum seekers in England over the years, and so she brought that absolutely invaluable expertise to this research, and it was a good partnership because I was able to feed in the Welsh context as well. So it's a fascinating piece of work. I learned an awful lot. So next slide, please go in. So the research, which was a feasibility study looking at various accommodation options for refused asylum seekers, so that particular group of people who find themselves with no recourse to public fund, was commissioned by the Welsh Government in the context of the Nation of Sanctuary, which Emmy mentioned earlier. So the Welsh Government have published a Nation of Sanctuary plan worth a look at. Accommodation is obviously one of the aspects that is covered in that plan. The main aim of the plan being that Wales can provide sanctuary for people who are fleeing situations where they are at risk. Yeah, from the last two presentations, we'll realise there's a lot of complexities in that, but worth having a look at the Nation of Sanctuary plan and thinking about what role different organisations and different sectors can play. I've put a link there. I understand the slides will get shared after the conference, so put a link there to the report that we produced. We examined provision in Wales and accommodation options for refused asylum seekers in place across the UK. There are a number of models and a number of parts of particularly England and Scotland where there's a sort of flourishing of models, and particular groups of organisations have come together. So we were able to look at those, but we also obviously looked at what was already around in Wales. As has been mentioned, refused asylum seekers have no recourse to public funds unless they meet certain conditions, and as also been flagged up, even if they do meet those certain conditions, they may not know they meet those certain conditions, or the organisations that they approach may not provide accurate advice or not accept that they do meet those conditions. So there's no accurate number for how many destitute asylum seekers there are in Wales. A piece of research was done a while ago by Joseph Rowntree Foundation that estimated around 5,000. There's other organisations who think different numbers, but actually there are a large number of folk in this situation, perhaps a larger number than many people would anticipate. Our work explored how existing models of accommodation could be grown and new ones established. And we also, the whole thing was set in the context of the crucial role of accommodation in supporting routes out of destitution. But the accommodation, and again, has been made really clear by the two previous presentations, has to be alongside good immigration advice and advocacy support, and also the support for other basic needs. So if someone hasn't got access to any benefits at all, they need to eat, they need to be able to travel, they need to be able to have social contact, etc. So as BAWSO does, a lot of fundraising happening to provide money for those basics in life. Next slide, please, Gwyn. So we identified a number of models of accommodation for refuged asylum seekers across the UK. The most common one was that first one. So informal arrangements, people stay once they've had to leave asylum, the accommodation that's provided under the asylum system by the Home Office, they often will stay with family and friends, and that may cause issues for those family and friends. Their immigration status may be fragile, etc. Certainly overcrowding in the context of COVID, all sorts of issues. But that is the most common situation that people find themselves in. Then we've got community hosting, which people may or may not be aware of. So this is where someone in the community will say, I've got a spare room and I'm going to make that available for an asylum seeker with no recourse to public funds to stay in my home for however long it takes to resolve their asylum issues. And there are community hosting projects in Wales, there are community hosting projects in England and Scotland as well. The issues with that in terms of obviously COVID's thrown up huge challenges to that, but also folk in terms of people may have mental health or other issues, the asylum seekers, where community hosting would be not appropriate either for them or for hosts. So it doesn't work for everyone, but it is an option. Then there are models that we don't have very many of in Wales, but are around shared housing for refuged asylum seekers. This is basically based on properties that are donated. They can be donated by individuals for a limited or an extensive period of time, maybe by the church, maybe by housing associations as well. So they're basically provided at no cost, and then organisations such as Home for You in Cardiff would fundraise to support payment of bills and the basics, etc. Something that we don't have yet in Wales, but is present in England and Scotland, is models of shared housing for a mix of refuged asylum seekers and refugees. So a mix of people who can pay, who have recourse to public funds and can pay, and those who can't. A sort of social enterprise model, if you like. There's also access to emergency accommodation, say, obviously that's changed a lot in the last year, but in pre-COVID, night shelters and hostels. Again, there are some challenges and some issues there. There's also a model where an organisation, through fundraising, donations, solidarity payments, etc., will pay rent for a refused asylum seeker to live in a house, a hostel, or a bed and breakfast. And there is a category which we called other models, which is kind of things that are emerging, use of shipping containers, which we've actually seen for other groups of homeless people as well. And there are examples of communities specifically set up to cater for destitute migrants. So those are the models of accommodation that we identified through the research. If we can move on, Gwyn, thank you. I'm skipping through this really, really quickly. So the way forward in Wales that we identified, firstly, was around building capacity. Some of the models that we found really good examples of in England and Scotland were present through partnerships of organisations that we don't necessarily have in Wales. So there's a real issue, and there's a lot of small organisations that may be totally voluntary or have a very small paid staff who are doing absolutely essential work in Wales, but find it even challenging to work in partnership because they're so stretched in terms of their core work. So there's a real issue about building capacity, not just of those organisations, but building capacity of organisations to work in partnership and work effectively in partnership. So organisations really playing to their strengths and contributing what they're best placed to contribute. The models we identified for establishment and further development, firstly, community hosting. We felt there was potential for that to be expanded to areas where it doesn't currently exist, but also expanded in numbers in the areas where it does exist, which are Cardiff and Swansea mainly. It's a little bit in Newport. Shared housing for refused asylum seekers. We've already seen some action on that, which is great in Cardiff, for instance. Wales on the West, Cadwyn, and now Cardiff Community Housing Association are working with Home for You to donate properties in various ways. The shared model for a mix of refused asylum seekers and residents able to pay is something that may come through and be linked to the work that Alicja is going to talk about, so I'll leave that one. Access to emergency accommodation as appropriate is something, again, Wanjiku talked about the different response folk get from different local authorities, and I think there's some work to be done there about making sure there's some consistency. And again, same issue that Wanjiku was talking about, and Emmy, access to public sector provision where somebody is entitled to help under the legislation, to make sure that that's done in a consistent way across local authorities as well. Very positively, a report was published relatively early last year. The Welsh Government has allocated funding and developments are underway, including Pawb working with an organisation called The Gap in Newport. A number of things are happening, which is really positive. And we've got this kind of window of opportunity while the public health emergency is with us, and NRPF hasn't, folks subject to NRPF are not having all the same challenges that they would normally have. So last slide, Gwyn. So just some considerations that we flagged up through the research, just issue of capacity and knowledge of organisations in different sectors. So who is best placed to do what, and what roles can different organisations play? The report's quite long, so I just want to point you in the direction of, I think it's page 57 and 58, which actually says a table there which sets out different sectors and different types of organisations and what roles they can play in this agenda. So that's worth having a look at and having a think about. Emphasise again the vital role of grassroots organisations working directly with refused asylum seekers, and the need to both support them but also pay for their time to be involved in partnership working. They're operating on very small amounts of money and doing amazing work, so we need to really think that through, and I think some of the funding Welsh Government's provided is doing that, which is good. And also coordination. There's a number of organisations that have received funding to work on housing, both for refugees and for asylum seekers, and there may be a position or a situation where they're approaching the same partner organisations for practical help. So again, it's the communication thing across the different organisations, across the different sectors, to make sure that we're actually having, we are coordinating, we're not crossing over each other, but most importantly that we're having the greatest impact for those folk that desperately need assistance in the form of accommodation.
Thanks very much, Tamsin, and well done for condensing that into such a short space of time. We've put the link to the report in the chat section, so please do check that out and consider how you can contribute to some of those solutions. Last but certainly not least, we've got Alicja from Pawb, who's going to talk about the Refugee Housing and Support Feasibility Study that was commissioned by Pawb, funded by Welsh Government, and carried out by Joy Unlimited. So Alicja, welcome to the conference.
Thanks very much, Katie. Yeah, so I'm going to focus on something that we did, this research that we did around housing refugees and the enforced sort of homelessness of refugees who often do have recourse to public funds, but it does have links with kind of supporting people within RPF, especially in the context of what Tamsin was talking about, those mixed accommodation models. So that research was undertaken sort of over a year ago now, at the same time as the Welsh Government commissioned report, and we did that in partnership with Joy Kent. we're now starting to implement recommendations that are organizations that are doing their own work on that need. So just to kind of provide a little bit of context, when an asylum seeker is granted leave to remain, they have 28 days to find alternative accommodation. They're pretty much made homeless and asked to leave home office accommodation. And they have those 28 days to establish themselves really within the community. And often for a range of reasons, both personal and structural, the time available is much shorter than 28 days. So it's 28 days really to sort out your life, housing, employment benefits, national insurance, where do you get money for bonds or deposits if you're going into the private rented sector, for example. And that all causes a huge challenge and enforced homelessness, really. And it's also reflected in Welsh Government homelessness statistics, the local authority homelessness statistics. If you look at the number of BAME people who, where the local authority have positively discharged its duty under Section 75, it kind of, for BAME people, it stands at 14% of the whole population, and the population across Wales is much smaller. And we know that a lot of this is caused by this problem around refugee homelessness, the enforced homelessness. In some local authorities, all refugees, kind of the pre-COVID situation, were considered priority need and helped, and others not. Although a priority need is obviously not kind of operational now, we all know that there just isn't enough accommodation in some areas, and there are huge challenges around this. Everyone's working hard on that. And those in priority need will often be placed in temporary accommodation, emergency accommodation initially, which kind of falls, despite great efforts, will fall short of catering for their specific needs. Their reasons for homelessness, are very, very different to kind of other homeless populations. So there's specific kind of support needed there. Majority of those that kind of don't have the priority needs kind of fall through the cracks. They end up just like people with no recourse to public funds, sofa surfing initially. They're helped by churches, friends, end up in kind of vastly overcrowded accommodation, emergency accommodation, or at times in the streets. Just a few weeks ago, our colleague Mark from the GAP project that was mentioned already in Newport kind of tweeted that his colleagues have spent all day trying to help 10 newly granted single male refugees to find accommodation. No accommodation available, no private rentals available, not a single one, irresponsible to evict large numbers during the pandemic. A quote from the research that we've done as well from someone with a refugee status: "I've been to housing options. They advised me to start looking for a private property. I've already looked online at Rightmove, Zoopla and Gumtree, but when I follow properties up, they say they will not accept me because I'm currently unemployed and on benefits." And obviously the kind of no DSS issue is a much wider issue for everyone really, but there is an added kind of vulnerability element here and the timescales. So in terms of numbers, when we did the study, we looked at numbers from 2018. And the numbers of all asylum seekers housed kind of by Home Office in Wales back then at that point was 2,700. When we wrote the report, Welsh Refugee Council Move On Support Service supported around 600 people per year through their Move On Support project, and that's just advice and support. And those numbers do fluctuate. They do get bigger at times, much higher. It's a great service, but we all know, I think we all agree within this sector and organizations that provide support for refugees, that we basically need some form of stable accommodation for people. And there is, like I said, some support available. Welsh Refugee Council Move On service is great, but really, really overstretched in terms of capacity. And they've got now a project linking up with landlords and PRS landlords, which is fantastic to see. Same with Oasis, which is refugee support and asylum seeker support organisation in Cardiff. They do some work there. There's a lighthouse project in Newport as well that provides support. But kind of, like I said, all working in this field kind of agree that just support and linking up is not enough. And capacity is overstretched. So we really need some level of supported, sustainable temporary accommodation. So there is somewhere for people to go, after those 28 days. And a steady base to get support around education, employment, immigration advice sometimes, and without that horrible threat of immediate homelessness. So having that steady base to establish your life here is crucial, and it's also a crucial element of kind of integration as well. So the feasibility study that we did basically looked at models of accommodation in England and tried to learn from them. We spoke quite a lot to different projects across England and tried to replicate it in Wales. And usually those programs are led by refugee organizations. In one case, it's an actual housing association that is refugee led, with in some cases with support from housing associations and local authorities. The housing stock is generally made up of a mixture of properties that are gifted or provided on a peppercorn ground rent, and include some private rented sector properties as well. In some cases, majority are leased from private rented sector, but again with lower kind of market rents agreed as part of a long-term leasing arrangements. They quite often access funding to provide a more holistic support, which is crucial in this case, through charitable trusts, central government funding, or specific elements. And there is a real opportunity here in Wales to, there's a lot of kind of support services related to education, employment, and so on available. So to have that steady base where those services could be delivered in partnership is a great opportunity. Often, I mean, majority of the programs that we looked at don't only house refugees, they also provide accommodation and support to refused asylum seekers. Usually, kind of once they establish themselves and the project grows a little bit, they provide around a quarter of their spaces to destitute people, kind of reinvesting the income from refugees. And the advantage of that is that it is kind of a self-sustaining model. Many projects meet the criteria for exempt housing benefit, which enables them to provide intensive housing management, specifically kind of designed to meet the needs of refugees and asylum seekers. And so what happened since the report? The gap in Newport has been mentioned. Just to clarify, there's no Welsh government funding there. They're kind of doing it out of their own accord, working closely with Pawb. We've linked the gap with Pawb, with the local authority, housing options team as well, who were all great. And Pawb have provided a property for the gap. And as we speak now, I think from 2 to 4, I think people have moved into the property. It was a hard to let property. Pawb have provided a lot of kind of support around housing requirements. They did some refurbishment. Some of the refurbishment has been done by volunteers from the GAP refugees themselves as well. And they're treating it as a basis for kind of growing the portfolio. They have plans to engage with private rented sector and already had some offers of other properties as well. We've kind of supported them to a minimal extent, really, with some documentation and kind of stuff related really to tenancy management and support. And at the same time, Pawb are working with another organization in Swansea, trying to establish something similar, but Pawb would be the landlord, not the actual refugee organization. At the moment, we're working in partnership with Oasis, Welsh Refugee Council, the Woolwich and Housing Justice on a kind of a much bigger project, which has kind of a broader scope than this. Part of it is provision of support for EU migrants, focusing on NRPF as well, and increasing kind of the capacity in Wales to host destitute people. Our part of that project is to work on a pilot housing project with Oasis. We know that they have been offered some properties from PRS landlords already, but they're very keen to work with housing associations as well, and with the council. So our role in this really is to support them, we'll have a kind of a, hopefully, we're applying for funding now, but hopefully we'll have a kind of a person who could manage that project and kind of establish it. And our role is to support that, but also share learning from it in other dispersal areas in Wales. So that programs like that could be established in other places as well. And just some quick thoughts around what you can do as landlords mainly, but as support providers. The question is, have you got any properties to offer? We know that some RSLs donated properties to some projects, some leased on a reduced rent. One of the projects that we looked at in England, ACH, when they were setting up, they pretty much went around town and they looked at empty council properties. They reached an agreement with the council to refurbish the properties in exchange for a peppercorn rent for a number of years. And that helped the project to establish itself. Big kind of part of it is as well, this is a new kind of role and a new thing to do for those organizations. So any kind of resources or time or expertise that you can offer to these projects would be very much welcome. If you have something to offer, please get in touch and we can link you in with the right people. Capacity is stretched and it's a new area. So just lending some time to support these projects, is really beneficial. Sometimes properties are donated and they need to be refurbished. It takes time to kind of get the resources for it. People need, stuff to go inside properties as well. In all this, I think it's one important thing to think about is not to see kind of refugees and asylum seekers only as victims. Really, they are survivors of often abuse or persecution in their countries of origin, but really, there are big numbers of people who are assets really to our communities. There are people who have a lot to offer and do offer a lot in our communities, be it skills or employment or culture or just the experience. But it's really difficult to rebuild your life when you're practically homeless. So we should really do everything that is possible to help make that happen and work together with refugee organizations to do that. Is quite shocking really and unacceptable, especially when you consider the numbers that so many people are pretty much forced into homelessness every year, and there just isn't that much for them in terms of accommodation, especially that there are successful kind of programs in England. So there's a lot for us to do. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Alicja. That was really helpful, and it was really good to hear from both yourself and Tamsin about some of the potential solutions that we can be thinking about going forward. We've had a comment in the chat from Thomas Hollick. I think the human rights approach is key here. No recourse to public funds and a whole raft of Home Office policies are making up the hostile environment, represent an affront to human rights, in my opinion, as well as the UK's international obligations to developing countries. And I'm sure that's something that's shared by a lot of people who are in the audience today and also by our speakers. And I think really important point that Alicja made at the end there about recognising the strengths and assets of people, the skills that people bring. They're not just sort of nameless people with no recourse to public funds. They're human beings who have so much to offer our communities, and you know, as part of a global citizen outlook, we need to be supporting people in that way. Alicja finished her contribution off by putting a really clear call out to people in the audience who are members of, you know, housing associations, support providers, about what you can do. And I'd like, we are running a little over time, but as a final thought, I'd just like to hear from each of the panel members again, if there's one message that you could put out there, what is your call, whether it be to the Welsh Government, to local authorities, to housing associations or support providers, whoever you want, or all of them, what would your kind of call to action be to people who are listening today? Do we have a volunteer to go first from our panel? Alicja, brilliant.
I can go. I mean, my main call would be to Boris Johnson and his government, but you know, that's probably a bit of a
I'm not sure he's in the
thing
audience
to do. Hopefully not. Yeah, I mean, get to know the refugee and asylum seeker organizations in your area. Your organizations they're quite often, you know, have very little funding, rely on very little funding, and quite often just the kindness of volunteers. And I think your organizations have a lot to offer there in terms of capacity, time, resources and funding as well, if that's available.
Thanks very much, Alicja. Any other panel members who want to finish off with a call to action from the sector? Emmy.
I'll go quickly just based on what Alicja said. I think also, you know, a lot of the people that we're working with, or people who have no recourse to public funds, they have a right to something that they don't necessarily know, people around them don't know that they have a right to. And I think it's really important that we as individuals, but also as organisations working within Wales, work with each other to recognise where there is an opportunity to challenge and make sure that that opportunity is taken as far as possible, because we often see people being in situations where they could challenge it and they have a right to, but unfortunately the support or knowledge or advice isn't there. And I think, you know, it's really important. I always think that humility is important in this sector, because we're not always the best people to deal with it, but we do have loads of expertise in Wales and we can really use it. So I think making good referrals, making sure to seek support and advice for individuals, making sure they are able to access it, that's fundamental to changing the situation at the moment.
Definitely, thank you, Emmy. And I think hopefully people will go away today and, you know, make the effort to learn a bit more about, you know, the issues affecting refugees and asylum seekers, and make contact with organisations with that specialist expertise to help people get access to the housing and support that they need. Tamsin, would you like to come in?
Yeah, just building on both Alicia's and Emmy's points, really. It's about I think there's a point about learning, about finding out, because I say I learned a lot during the piece of research, including what's going to happen when the public health emergency comes to an end. I think that's the really scary bit, is that normally there would be a kind of flow of people who having their asylum decisions made, and if adverse decisions would then be falling into destitution. But because of the good, you know, a lot of the good stuff that's in place at the moment, there's going to be more of a sort of feeling of a cliff edge. And I think that's, you know, so you know, if you're just talk to organisations like Home for You, like the Welsh Refugee Council, like Oasis, etc., just find out what's going to happen there. But I think really thinking about playing organisations and individuals playing to their strengths, you know, really important, that particularly around the legal advice, people get absolutely spot on, well informed, you know, because it's so, you know, it's their lives, it's, you know, and their futures. But, you know, the housing and support sector has got a huge role to play as well. So really, you know, as others have said, get to know each other better across those sectors, and really think about, and even maybe as an individual or someone in your family might want to be a community host, you know. So just really, you know, I suppose think it from the individual personal level right through to your kind of professional take. And I'll say this is many things, isn't it? And really combat the, you know, do everything we can to combat the stigma and the othering of folk, you know, through the hostile environment and the day-to-day way that plays out, you know. And I think we can all play a small part in really challenging that.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, you talk about that cliff edge of people with no recourse to public funds no longer having that access to housing and support when the pandemic starts to come to an end, and of course that will also affect lots of people when the eviction ban ends, and so we may have a kind of tidal wave of lots of people needing that housing and support, and it's really important that people with no recourse to public funds don't get forgotten within that. So anything that we can do to plan, to inform ourselves and to consider what we can do in advance of that would be really useful. Wanjiku, did you want to come in with anything?
Yes, just to say, I mentioned it in my presentation, and I'm hoping that the people I'm speaking to are in positions to help. Just when a woman comes with an issue, when she's suffered domestic abuse, when she's been a victim of VALDA, forced marriage, honor-based violence, FGM, domestic abuse, as we know it, sexual violence, she's BME, she has no recourse to public funds. Look at that problem first. Think about her as a woman who needs help with that domestic abuse issue, without thinking about her immigration status, without thinking whether she's black or blue, because that's what we see a lot. And I keep giving the example of how people love dogs. And if you found a dog in distress by the side of the road, you wouldn't start to think, is he yellow, is he black, has he got this right or the other right? You need to help that dog. You need to support that woman from a domestic abuse issue before you think about her immigration status. That's all I could ask.
Thank you so much, Wanjiku.
Also to help us lobby and campaign for that no recourse to public funds rule to be removed, and especially for vulnerable people. It's really, really difficult to support. On top of everything else, you're dealing about somebody's immigration status. Just help us to lobby and campaign against that rule. And especially in Wales, we told over and over again that immigration is not a devolved role, but still there's something the Welsh government can do. They've done it during this COVID year. They can continue doing this good work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wanjiku, and I think that your perspective has been absolutely critical in all of this, because we've heard about the barriers and the challenges that face lots of people without any recourse to public funds, but for people who are also dealing with the challenges of domestic abuse and other forms of violence and abuse, then it's unimaginable to be going through that and be unclear or unsure about whether you've got any right to any housing or support, and the consequences of women remaining in those abusive relationships because of that is a challenge that we have to overcome. So thank you so much, Wanjiku, for coming on and talking specifically about that issue and the work of BAWSO. As you said, and as Tamsin's reflected, we're all individuals as well as being part of organisations, and we can use our voices to reduce that stigma, and also use our voices to our elected representatives, to our MPs, to our members of the Senedd. We've got a Senedd election coming up in a few months, and it's really important that we use our voices to make sure that candidates and politicians are aware of these issues and willing to act on them. Thank you so much to our fantastic panel for a really thought-provoking final session of the day. I hope that sparks some thoughts in the audience about what you and your organisations can do to better support people with no recourse to public funds. Clear messages about partnership and us working together, relying on the different strengths that our organisations can bring to the table to help provide that valuable housing and support for people. Really grateful to everyone who's participated in today. Thanks again to our main conference sponsors, Clwyd Allen and Digital Communities Wales, and a big thank you to our day sponsor, Cadwyn Housing Association. Today we've talked about the different responses to homelessness across Great Britain, hearing from Pete Mackey. We've had some fantastic leadership reflections from Claire Budden and Lindsay Cordery-Bruce. We had a great session with frontline workers at lunchtime, where we heard lots of reflections on how the pandemic has impacted frontline workers. We considered digital support with Digital Communities Wales, with Innovate Trust and Llamau, and how that's going to shape the future of support services. And we've had this fantastic session looking at the really important issue of no recourse to public funds. I hope that lots of you will join us tomorrow for our final day of conference. The theme for tomorrow is Building Back Fairer, and it's sponsored by Mirrors and United Welsh. We'll be talking about valuing our key workers, hearing from Unite the Union, the Frontline Network and Cartrefi Cymru. We'll also be having a really important session about challenging racism and inequality in the housing sector and wider society. So we're really looking forward to getting involved in that discussion and challenging ourselves and our organisations to do better. And we'll finish off with reflections on the experts by experience. We'll be hearing interviews with people with lived experience about what they want to see in the future, how they think homelessness should be ended, and what they want to see from politicians elected in the Senedd elections. We'll finish off by launching our manifesto for the Senedd elections and then going into a workshop with frontline workers to make sure that they can have their voices heard. Thank you so much for everyone who's attended today, to our sponsors and our fantastic speakers, and we hope to see lots of people tomorrow. Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening.